Welcome to Real Estate and Murder, a podcast about real estate and murder.
I am Amy Brockbank.
And I am Sarah Brager. We are both licensed real estate agents in the state of Utah who have a common fascination with true crime.
We are here to tell you stories of murder amongst the real estate community. It might be an agent, it might be a client, it might be an undetected serial killer.
When it comes to real estate crimes, some are predators and some are prey.
We just want to issue a trigger warning. The content of these cases can be difficult to hear from time to time, and please listen with care.
All right, ladies, welcome back to Real Estate and Murder, Part 2 of the death of Gary Triano and Pam Philips. She didn't die, but the involvement with Pam Philips.
Yeah.
So we're back. We wrapped up Part 1, just sharing about Gary's death and how it happened, which was really brutal. So
a little graphic.
Very graphic. Now we're going to get into kind of the aftermath of all of that, including the investigation. So right after Gary died, of course, the police are going to start calling family and friends and they're going to start looking at people who are maybe close to the case. So, of course, they go ahead and give Pam Philips, Gary's now ex-wife, a call, and she is up in Aspen, Colorado. So, Amy, you were going to tell us a little bit about her life post-divorce from Gary.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the police are just doing their due diligence. They've probably called his first, there's a long list of people that they need to reach out to. But because Pam and Gary have kids, they also have to notify them of his death, too. So there was two purposes,
right?
I think, for them reaching out to Pam. But the Tucson police inform her that Gary has been killed. And I believe at this point where she's reached that they have classified it as a murder, not just an accident. And Pam had started, when she moved to Aspen, she had a little bit of money, but from the divorce, and she had started back into real estate. She had met a bunch of friends. She had met some people. She's starting another side business or something, or helping with a business.
That's right. It was called like Starlight Babies.
Yeah.
No idea what that is.
Basically, so it's astrological charts for children.
Horses. Okay.
So anyway, but she was doing all of these different things in Aspen. So it sounds like she really became part of, like, they were going to stay in Aspen. She's settling her life. And we all know as real estate agents, it's hard to break into a new market that you're not from there. And so a lot of agents, when they move, and I guess we could ask Candy this.
I was just going to say that. Let's ask her what it's like to break into a new market.
As you move to a different place to then restart your real estate business, because all of your contacts, you have to start fresh. So for you, Candy.
Well, and I know, Candy, that you made a stop in between Tucson and Utah, because that's where we actually met. So what was that like?
The Super Bowl of real estate. San Francisco.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Their northern part. And then I lived in Mountain View, and I worked out of the Coldwell Banker Los Altos office. And for those that might not know, that is the highest dollar per square foot in our country.
Oh, wow.
Altos. It's more than downtown San Francisco.
Wow.
So it was a remarkable experience. I would say I ended up working with the number one agent of the office. We worked together, and it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't as fun or enjoyable. The rewarding part of real estate is the relationships.
Sure, it is. Yep.
These were investors. They used real estate. Real estate, when San Francisco was at its height, was like buying a stock.
Yeah.
They wouldn't move in the home. They'd spend a couple million and then 3 years later say, I want to sell it for $5 million. But it felt like we were moving pieces of money.
Yeah.
Which was the setup to the problem that San Francisco is currently experiencing, right?
Right. So in that market, even though I built a little bit, I mostly focused working with someone who had an established business.
Mm-hmm.
Only lived there 2.5 years.
Right.
It has what happens is when you really care about people and you enjoy housing and you believe where people live matters, you can sell real estate in any market because that's what people are attracted to.
That's very insightful.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a skill that we know you have because you've been successful in the markets as you've moved. So what was it like breaking into the Utah market then? Because you've had incredible success here too.
Yeah, the advantage I had was when I lived in Tucson for 40 years. So I had my real estate career was like 25 years there. We invested in property in Utah. And I had an 18-year-old move here right out of high school and she never came home, which meant we came up here to visit her. And, she never moved back. She came to visit.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time in Utah and I did buy real estate here and bought a home. So Utah felt like my second home.
Okay.
I think there was some advantage there. And many of my clients from Arizona do move here. So that's another.
So you have like a referral network?
I have some. Yeah, I do. However, those 39 sales that I had in Tucson my first year, my manager asked me to go through those sales with our office. Back then, it was different. Over 300 of us. And there was concern about where I was picking up these clients.
Oh, shoot. Stealing? You were hijacking. You have to prove.
I was hijacking them from maybe a floor call.
Because your success was so surprising at that volume being so brand new. Yeah.
I've been very grateful, and this is something for anyone listening or agents listening or people that are curious about their own businesses. She said, could you go ahead and go through your 39 sales and tell our office where they came from? So I made a chart, and I'm not sure I would have done this, but it really allowed me to evaluate where my business came from.
Yeah.
And I made a little bar chart. And there was one sale out of 39 of someone that I knew. It was a $50,000 piece of land. All the others I did not know before I was a real estate agent.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, the people that I knew, they didn't quite trust me yet. I was a new agent.
Sure. No,
Yeah,
that's
I think
common.
we're our harshest critics, like friends and family of each other. I like you as a person, but I don't know that I want to trust you with the biggest transaction of my life.
So these were people, strangers that and so that was interesting to me. And it also, when I talk to new agents or anyone who wants to build up their business, they don't need to go to friends and family. They can, because they're the funnest people to work with. However, they don't need their friends and family to build a career.
Yeah.
Is what I learned. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's very, very impressive.
Yeah.
Also, it's very impressive. And I'm not saying this because you're my aunt and I have any need to become your favorite niece, but I'm just, flatter you. I'm just saying, you keep saying that you were in Tucson for 40 years. And I know that then you lived in San Francisco and then you've been here for 6 years. You don't look like you could be more than 46 years old. You really don't. Seriously, though.
Yeah.
She keeps saying I was there for 40 years having a successful career. I'm like, is she sure? You were going to be a math teacher, right?
62 years old.
Don't look a day. Very impressive on many fronts.
Thank you.
So it's different breaking into a new market, though, no matter where where you are, who you are. But when you act with integrity, that makes it easier in any field. But this is different for Pam. She's jumping into this new market in Aspen, Colorado with a motive.
Yeah, and Aspen, Colorado is a high-end market, which high-end clients are a different animal, I'll say, because when you're solely luxury, there's a lot of demands and stuff. And I realized the Tucson market, when she was there was some luxury places, but most of it was just median or starter places. And so she also has this uphill, but she is used to this affluent lifestyle. So maybe she worked it up.
I was just going to say, yeah. She knows how to network in that crowd.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So,
well, she bought a luxury home herself in Aspen, a really beautiful home. I did see a photo of it. It had those gorgeous big windows and you're in forest scenery, you know? So she kind of dived in. She was, from what I remember, she was able to keep the proceeds from the sale of their home in Tucson from the divorce. And so she was able to buy a home.
Yeah,
but
really quickly.
If you move into a community in a neighborhood and you can kind of fit right in, it's got to give you a leg up.
That's true. So while she's on the phone with the police and going back and forth, with different, things as she's digesting the news, she realizes or is told, I'm not really sure, just depending on who you talk to, that there was a $2 million life insurance policy still with Gary. And he had changed pre-divorce. He had changed the beneficiaries to be his 2 children with her. And he had assigned, after the divorce, like a mutual family friend or whatever to make the payments on that. But from what we've been able to kind of uncover and look through material and, our audience knows, because we say this every episode, not everything on the internet is true, obviously.
Right.
And so there's probably a lot of discrepancy there. But there was a missed payment on his life insurance policy. And so Pam ended up making that life insurance payment. During this conversation, Pam finds out or is reminded or already knew, depending on which version you want to believe, but that there's a $2 million life insurance policy on Gary. And the beneficiaries are her 2 children. And both of them are under the age of 18, meaning that they cannot collect it, which means she's in charge of this money. And so...
and $2 million is a lot now, but it was even more then in the sense, like, do you know what I mean?
Sure.
In terms of inflation, that was a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's not paid out to Pam right away. There was like a missed payment and different things that the insurance company, the payment was then made. And anyway, there's some details there that we won't really dive into, but just for our audience to know that. The police ask her if she would be willing to take a lie detector test. I think they're trying to rule out people at this point. And yes, she's in Aspen, but if she traveled or paid someone or whatever, and she refuses the lie detector, which I don't find. I know a lot of people or a lot of armchair sleuths will say, oh, that's red flag, but lie detector tests are so unpredictable.
Well, and we know that more now today
than we did
back then. Like, we know that they are unreliable. They're also not admissible in court anymore. But yeah, back then.
If you fail, police will still use it against you.
Well, exactly. And that's if I got called to take a lie detector test, whether I was guilty or not, I would say no.
Yeah, I would fail the first question. Is your name Amy? Oh, I don't know. Maybe.
But that's
I don't know. Is it my name?
That's exactly why they're infallible. Like, they're not perfect. If someone has nervousness or an increased heart rate because they're scared, like, that's going to all potentially contribute to signs that would not be in their favor. So but yes, I think, detectives and investigators use that as a chip. Right?
Yeah, to kind of eliminate suspects,
or to say, like, why aren't you willing to take one?
Yeah.
That's just the way it was, though.
Yeah, my daughter had to take a lie detector test. She is in a field where she can be called to be like an expert witness in criminal cases. And as she went in to go take it, she had to do this huge background check. And then the polygraph examiner told her, like, here's the definitions. Here's what I mean when I say this. Do you have any questions? And her polygraph was like 3 hours long.
Wow.
And everything was sensitive. She couldn't move. She had to sit a certain way because she was hooked up to all these sensors to read your
temperature.
Yeah, like any difference with your body.
That sounds stressful.
No, she was leading up to it. She was like, I'm going to fail. I was like, you're not going to fail. Like, there's nothing in your background that would make you fail this. And she was like,
didn't you say she was worried about like one speeding ticket she had at that point?
She had a parking ticket in high school.
Yeah. That's how clean this interview is going to be. But even she was nervous.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and we can't wait to have her on the podcast, by the way. That's happening. But she's getting settled in her career, so we can't wait to hear some of the stories she collects.
But yeah, I mean, just the anticipation of going into that when you are squeaky clean versus,
exactly.
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
It
but
would be so stressful.
I don't think it's suspicious at this point that she says no.
Police
Although
do
back
say
then
it's
they do.
suspicious
Of course
that,
they do. Of course they do.
she would refuse to take a polygraph.
Of course they do.
During her time in Aspen, she has a friend. Her name is Laura Chapman. So if you're familiar with the case,
that name comes up later.
Yeah, well, she gives a lot of interviews later. Laura claims that the reason why Pam moves to Aspen is so that she can look for her, quote, next ATM, meaning that she's running in these circles. She's only wanting to marry someone with money and different things. I think when you're accustomed to that or you become accustomed to that, it's just natural, like, oh, this is the type of person I want to marry. But the way it's worded, the next ATM, Pam obviously denies, but
sure,
and she said that.
Whether it's true or not, it's consistent with what we've heard at every step in her life. So.
Yeah. So she meets a man named Ron Young, who Sarah introduced at the beginning of our part 1 episode. And she claims that he's a brilliant businessman, that he was just helping her set up these different companies and break into the Aspen market. She's also had friends of hers that he was also helping in their business. The housekeeper and other people have countered that claim and said that they were actually dating. And I think Pam referred in one interview that she was dating, but then recanted that. And we know that Ron is kind of he's not what Pam claims she's looking for in a husband.
No, he is a con man.
Yeah.
He is a con man that was representing himself as wealthy, and he was in this affluent community. He took advantage of that community, and then he skipped town. So are we ready to get into that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to take us forward into the investigation a little bit, and a lot of it circles around Ron. Kenny, are you ready for this, for what happens next?
I'm so ready.
Okay, I don't know what you know about what goes on from here out, but wild. Okay, so the police or investigators, right, they're looking into this case. It is very clear that this was not an accident. This was an intentional death, just by the type of bomb and the violence of it. Right, and of course it was a bomb, so of course it was. Like, that's never an accident. But they are, they're investigating around. They're asking, of course, all of the people that are in Gary's circle and proximity. And like we've said earlier, he did unfortunately have a lot of enemies at that point in his life because of a lot of investments gone bad and relationships that were harmed. And so they've got a long list of people to look through. And of course, they're going to look at ex-wives as well as, ex-business partners. They briefly mentioned the mob. They actually pursue that lead the most, which I think does distract them a little bit. But I wasn't there for that. However, they're calling around and they're doing their due diligence. So they do connect the dots between Pam now living in Aspen and something a little suspicious that happened right before Gary's death. So in the summer of 1996, and Gary, again, died on November 1st. So in the summer, Pam Philips had suddenly turned on her partner or friend and accused Ron Young of fraud for using her credit cards and stealing her money. So when she called the police to report this, Young disappears. He just disappears into the night. He actually rents a van with a fraudulent credit card. And then the owners of the van, like the rental company, end up reporting the van stolen because it never comes back. So the van is actually found a couple of months later. Candy, would you like to guess where the van was found?
Yes.
It's not Tucson. I shouldn't have set you up like that. Pick a state, any state.
I'm thinking somewhere between Florida and Tucson.
Yeah, California.
Oh,
But yeah, that would have made sense. That was totally setting you up
I
just
was
to see.
trying to do the C and the A.
Yeah, my point is, it's so unusual, like so odd, right? Random, and not really. It doesn't correlate to the rest of the story, so it's really weird. But this van is found in Yuba, California, and the people living on that street actually called it into the police because they were like, this van's been sitting here forever. And of course, true to a criminal, it's like a white van with no windows, right? Of course it is. So the police search the van and they find some shocking information. Besides finding a sawed-off shotgun, they also find a whole bunch of paperwork, and all of it relates to Gary Triano. So in this van, they find divorce papers, details about the divorce and the settlements, business documents, and a receipt for a hotel in Tucson, Arizona, a couple of weeks before Gary died.
Which I will just say, like, criminals are kind of stupid anyway, but that's a lot of evidence to leave behind in a van. Like, you just leave the van and there's like nothing to connect
It is.
anything to.
It is. And you have to think, I mean, for one thing, this man is a con man. He used a fraudulent credit card. When the rental company called it in, they called it in under a different name. And we're in 1994. Like, DNA is barely a thing. I mean,
Yeah,
it
not
was always
really.
a thing, but used
to
in
collect the evidence.
used in court cases. Also, 911 was new. Think about that. 911 took place. Yeah, you'd be surprised at how late it took place. Hey, Amy, you've got your computer. Will you Google it? When 911 became standardized, not in existence.
Let me
but
tell you
standardized.
who did it. Guess who was president? Bill Clinton. That's how long it took for the 911 system in the U.S. to get. I don't even have to Google it.
To
You know
become
why?
standardized.
Because there is a documentary that you can watch called The Witness. And basically a woman is killed in New York and supposedly like 30 some odd people hear her murder and nobody calls the police.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it takes till Bill Clinton is president to have 911.
For it to become standardized.
Yeah.
Amber alerts happen around this time. So a lot of things that we're accustomed to now in our society really weren't in play back then. So yeah, it's a lot of evidence to leave in one place and then run away. But I guess to his credit, he successfully disappears for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's suspicious.
It would
for
have
sure.
been longer though, had
Yeah,
not that I'm telling criminals how to do their job. Just don't murder someone, but
Ron, get your act together. So, but remember, this is in October. So this is actually prior to Gary's death. So the van is suspicious, but Gary hasn't died yet, guys. So the police take record of this. They take note. The van was rented out of Aspen, Colorado. So it gets back to the police there, of course. And then Gary dies shortly after. So the detectives in Aspen call down to Tucson, Arizona when they hear, like, this is big news, this bombing. And it's obviously tied to a local there in Aspen, Pam. So they actually call down and they give the detectives down in Tucson this information that this van was found, that it was really suspicious. And of course, so the police want to interview Ronald Young or whatever name he used to rent the van. I'm actually not sure what name that was. But they can't find Ron. He is gone. Ron
which is where the episode of America's Most Wanted comes in.
Yeah. So, well, actually, the case goes cold at this point.
Yeah.
This is still in 1996.
Okay.
So the case goes cold. They can't connect any dots to anyone else. The mob theory dies, and Ron is just never to be seen again. So in 2005, the case actually, it ramps back up because there are some bomb experts named Tony and Tom at the ATF who were reviewing cold cases, and they took a look at the murder of Gary Triano and thought this one's super interesting, possibly solvable. Let's start working it again. And so one of the first really kind of important moves that they make is they actually determine that the bomb built was very amateur and that it was kind of sloppy. It was thrown together. I mean, it was violent, but to them, that clearly states that it was not a professional hit or a mob hit because it was a completely amateur bomb. And they are also able to determine that the bomb was remote detonated. So whoever set the bomb off was in proximity to Gary, watching Gary get in his vehicle and then detonated this violent bomb. So they're reviewing the case files, and a Tucson detective by the name of James Gamber becomes more and more convinced that the key to this case has to lie somewhere between Pam Philips and this vanished con man, Ronald Young. So they also discover that he had defrauded several other people all in the Aspen area. So they start to revisit Ron's history, and they're going to really get into what his background is like to see if they can charge him with new charges now. And they are able to do so based on the reports, including Pam's, of felony theft and fraud back at the time in the 90s. And again, he hasn't been seen in 9 years. They don't know where he is. And so in 2005, they decide to call a little TV show called America's Most Wanted. So that brings us to November 21st, 2005, where Ron is apprehended by police in Florida. So here's where it gets really wild. We're going to keep going down the spiral here. He's apprehended, and of course, they are interested in him as a part of the murder, but they can only arrest him right now on charges of the fraud and the felony theft. So police search his apartment and a storage unit that he owns, and they discover something incredible about Ron. He is an obsessive record keeper. He has receipts on everything that he's done in his life, all of his cons, his money going in and out. He has taken detailed notes of how successful he is in his brain. Amy's laughing. I'm not sure if it's at me or at her paper.
No, it's just, I find it fascinating how people are like, oh, I'm going to do these crimes, commit these crimes. I'm gonna plan everything out
and keep proof.
And they keep everything. They've got a document. Like
Ron's record keeping sunk his own ship. It absolutely did. And I'm sure he's still sitting in prison to this day. Like, why did I have all those bankers' boxes
did I have
full of my stuff?
Spreadsheet?
So he has kept so many different types of records for like the fraud and this time period starting in the 90s. He's got it all. So he actually has envelopes saved that were like certified mail. And on those envelopes are written dollar amounts. So the police are starting to track that Ron was being sent cash through certified mail at these certain dates because certified mail is stamped. So the police find out that whoever is sending the money to Ron out here in Florida is tracking the dates on it because they have to report to Ron when the money is going to come. So the money is found to be usually between like $1,800 and $2,000, and it's on a regular rotating schedule twice a month. Okay. And he has pictures of all of this. He has all the envelopes.
This thought came to my mind. This is his business.
Yes.
You guys will always remember your first sale.
That's so true.
Yeah.
You might even have a picture of it. If someone went into your records, they're like, what is this?
That's so true.
He hangs $1 on his wall for every time he's defrauded someone. This is my first $1 from Joe.
He has pride about his con jobs.
That's true.
We have pride in helping someone find the best house possible.
That's true. And he's keeping it. Yeah, his ego is keeping his success all recorded.
Right.
That's so true. And he also, as a part of that, has a lot of anger and resentment about how something went down. And so he's keeping proof because he is not expected to be apprehended at the chiropractor's office. So he's, in his mind, continuing to keep this going. So this person would mail, again, this cash to him on this regular rotating record. And can you guys guess at all who was sending that money to Ron in Florida?
I'm going to guess it's Pam.
Me too.
Yeah.
Pam.
It was Pam Philips. So, but just to make your day even better, you guys, Ron didn't just keep extensive financial documentation. He actually recorded dozens of hours of telephone conversation. So if Ron's financial documentation wasn't going to send him to prison, his phone calls are. So I have a little clip in here of some of the audio that's played in some of these sources. So, Amy, how about you read Ron Young's audio right here? What is he saying over the phone?
If I ever found out that you compromised me for your benefit, that would be really unfortunate for you because there's just plenty of stuff that I could literally dig out of the ground and you're a fried duck.
Now, when you hear this audio, if you watch one of the documentaries or listen to a podcast where they have his audio played, you sounded very nice when you said that. He sounds
Not-
very menacing.
He's like threatening.
Very
Well, it's
threatening.
a
He has like a
threat.
deep voice.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy. It makes your spidey senses go off. Like, he's creepy. Also, I don't know what a fried duck is, but it kind of sounds delicious.
I guess
That's
it's
the chef in you.
Yeah.
That sounds delicious. It's dinner. Also, here's another clip of audio tape. Candy, do you want to read the next one where Ron Young says on the phone?
Well, I'll tell you, you're going to be very serious when you sit in a woman's prison for murder.
So this audio that the police have all of these tapes it's pretty damning, right? I mean, it's very obvious that something shady is going on here.
It's not as bad as Anna Walsh's.
Oh my gosh, Brian Walsh was married to Anna Walsh, and he Google searched the most shocking searches. You can listen to our case coverage on it. He searched some shockingly disturbing
Play
content.
by like hour by hour. Like it was
How
wild.
to kill and dissolve a body.
Like when
Can
does a
police
body
track this search?
Yeah, when does the body start to smell?
Yes, yeah. Super similar. Let's keep all the data, let's keep all of this. Now, the person on the other end of the phone is, of course, identified to be Pam. And they have tons and tons of these phone calls going back, and they actually get increasingly bitter towards some of the end of the recordings. Pam is calling him to say, I can't give you more money. Payments are going to be late this month. So this is when Ron starts to get threatening and starts to say, well, I'm going to rat you out for murder. However, on these tapes, the name Gary is never mentioned, and there's no confession of murder between the two of them. So in their brains, I guess they thought they were being, smart to not bring up the details.
Well, Ron is recording. Pam doesn't know that Ron's recording these.
Yeah, I would assume she didn't know.
Yeah.
For sure.
So
he's creating all this content to use against her as blackmail. And ironically, he's the one that gets arrested for it first.
yeah.
It's great. So the police are able to determine at this point, and remember, Ron is pissed at Pam at this point because she stopped making payments, or at least wasn't making them on time. And so Ron flips on her. Like, he's going to, well, he knows he's busted.
Pam had flipped on him before by filing a police report. Yes, later she recanted it, but,
So keep all this timeline in mind because I'm going to revisit it later. But
okay.
Yeah, she called the police in the summer of 1996 to report that he had stolen things from her. The van comes up, then Gary dies. Now we're fast forwarded almost a decade. So just keep all that in mind. The police they conclude that Pam hired Ron to kill Gary in exchange for $400,000 of the $2 million life policy. Now, like Amy mentioned earlier, these payments on this large policy were being made over time. It was not a lump sum settlement. And so every time she would get a draw from it, she would send him a cut. Okay. So now it's time to arrest both Ron and Pamela for the murder of Gary Triano. Okay. And this is in October of 2008. So they arrested Ron. Remember, he spent a year in prison for the weapons charges.
I'm going to stop you for a second.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Because in 2006, when they're tracking him and all of this stuff, federal authorities actually execute a search warrant on Pam's Aspen home.
Right. Yes.
So after they've executed this search warrant, Pam leaves. She goes to Europe. She has her daughter living in Europe at the time. And she's like, yeah, I'm done with this.
Yep.
Because I would think that in the affluent neighborhood that she was living in, federal authorities come up, serve a search warrant. All the neighbors are talking. Like, that can't be good for business.
No, it's not. And yeah, we're going to get into her fleeing the country right now. But he was arrested in Florida in 2005, spent that year in prison. And this is when they're doing all their investigation work. They have all the tapes. They have all this stuff that Ron had
I'm
kept.
just saying, like, as this is
So
as
of course
this is
she's
coming
alerted to
up,
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She doesn't know all this is happening until the feds show up at her house with the
Right.
search warrant in 2006.
Yes, absolutely. So she is at this point going to go on the run. And she heads over to Switzerland, and I guess her daughter is living there.
She
It says
travels
in the
to
materials.
London and Milan first, but her daughter's living in Switzerland or around Switzerland, and that's where she kind of ends up staying.
Right. So she's there, and the police actually start working with Switzerland to extradite her, but they won't do that unless the death penalty is off the table, which a lot of European countries have that stance that they will not extradite a suspect if the death penalty is on the table.
And Switzerland's always neutral.
That was great. Yep. So they are working with Switzerland to extradite her, but she does not get arrested in Switzerland. Finally, the prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table. Now, remember how brutal and violent that death was, okay? But they're willing to take it off the table just to get Pam brought back to the United States so that they can bring her to justice. And finally, the detectives get the search warrant, go to Switzerland. They're there to pick her up. They knock on the door, and Pam is gone again. She's on the run, and they have to track her down again. So we get all the way to 2010, and they finally are able to apprehend her in Austria thanks to the sighting. Someone calls it in, and detectives are able to go to Austria and pick her up and arrest her. Now, they bring her back to the United States, and if you watch any of the, again, documentaries or footage, she's being escorted back through the airport by like 20 people. Like, they had finally caught this criminal who is involved somehow in this gruesome death. They're pissed off because they've been chasing her for this long and across the world, and they are not letting her out of their sight.
Oh, the police. Oh, we have to go to Europe. Oh, I'll volunteer to go help. I'll go help too. Like, come on. Like, it wasn't just solely work.
They're like, I don't think 10 of us is enough. We need a few more.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So there is one reporter who's on site at the airport when Pam is being brought back. And she kind of she's trying to get the story. She's kind of harassing Pam. She's like, were you involved? Were you involved? Were you involved? And Pam is just ignoring her. The right thing to do. But finally, as she's being put into the police car, the journalist takes one more shot and is like, how does it feel to be back in Arizona? And Pam goes, it's a little warm.
Oh.
So she's probably right. But Pam's back. And so she is going to go to trial now. So Amy, you're going to tell us about the trials of Ron and Pam.
So interestingly enough, Pam isn't arrested and brought back to the U.S. until Ron's already gone to trial. He's already gone. He's been tried. He's been convicted.
Yeah, they didn't have to wait on him.
No, with a jury. But that's how long it took for them to get her.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron never gives up her name. He never says she was involved. He always claims he was innocent. Like,
once he gets to trial, yeah, he claims he's innocent.
The whole time, though, I think, like, he's never said, like, to the police, or at least any of the research that I've been able to find, like, okay, I will give you some information, but what are you going to do for me? Like, criminals are usually always wanting to negotiate and deal, and that's why you have, like, jailhouse snitches, right, is what they're referred to, is, like, just, like, how can I benefit from this? And Ron never turns or even admits to Pam's involvement, or, you know, anyway, I find that interesting. I'm always kind of the devil's advocate, I guess, in our podcast, because sometimes I'm like, well, there's another side to this story. It's just, it doesn't feel like it's all wrapped up in a nice little neat package.
Yeah, it never is.
I know. Murder is never logical, I guess.
No, it's not, but he does maintain his innocence. You're right. And he does get what do you call it? He does get found guilty, but that's not English.
Yeah, he's found
guilty. There you go. He's got to get him guilty.
Yeah. Pam goes to court. Her lawyer it's a law firm from Switzerland that ends up she hires as her lawyers. I'm not really sure if they're the ones that actually come or if they're kind of this mediation in between.
Interesting.
But they argue a lot of things. They argue that it was really a mafia hit because of the car bombing situation. They actually sent a bunch of investigators to look into this mafia lead. And when I say investigators, they're obviously not like U.S. police investigators.
I mean, the strategy for that would be to create a reason.
It does. Yeah,
Yes,
it
exactly.
makes sense.
Not necessarily they believed it.
No.
Exactly.
Like, we want the jury to think there's a chance
There's other options.
Yeah.
that we're not sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Yep, exactly.
Pam's lawyers argue that a man named Neil McNeese, who was very involved in crime, was actually the real killer. And Jerry Capuano, I don't know that I'm saying that right, but
Good guess.
anyway, he was the bomb maker. And they claimed that they found the warehouse where all of the same parts that were to make a bomb were actually there, that this man used and knew how to make bombs all the time, that this was consistent with a pattern. The problem with their defense is that both Neil and Jerry have passed away. And so it's,
or maybe that is their defense.
yeah, well,
Blame it on the dead guys.
yeah, well, it's not like the police could say like, oh yeah, I went and interviewed this. The trial goes on for a long time. In fact, there's online, you can go through and look at like what happens on day 3, what happens on day 10, what happens on day 17. Like there's just all of this written material on what is gone on the trial. One of the things that I found interesting is that on one of the days when the ATF shows up, they had conducted all of these tests with the canvas bag, the batteries, the wood fragments, all the things from the bomb, but the report wasn't written until 2003. So Gary is murdered all those years earlier, 7 years after the explosion, and then the ATF writes the report. Now, the ATF argues on the stand that his name was Bradley Cooper, that ends up kind of testifying in this. But he says that they were stretched thin. There was understaffing issues. They were focused on Columbine shootings and other things that were ended up happening, throughout the years, that they were just then getting to the report, but the report didn't change what was investigated. Like the report was just like the finalized thing. And they admit that his murder was kind of put on the back burner for the report. And so it's just interesting, the narrative that goes on, the back and forth with the legal. Like, obviously, like, her legal team does what any accused person would want their legal team to do. They were trying to create the reasonable doubt. They were bringing in other things. They were,
Yeah, sure. Right.
arguing the state's evidence, to the best that they can. Pam is found guilty, and she appeals her sentence because she feels like, there was some violations in her case, and the Supreme Court of Arizona ends up
Upholding her
conviction, and denying her request for, she feels like the state didn't give all the evidence. Like, we hear about it all the time. The state didn't give us privy to this, and the state didn't give us this, and this instruction was incorrect, or whatever it was.
Looking for technicalities.
Exactly, to get out of her conviction.
Now tell us what year this is that she's convicted. Do you have that in your notes? I believe in one of the sources I was listening to, that
she
it was
goes to trial in
2017.
2014.
Okay, and it takes all the way till 2017 for the either appeal or for the conviction. But it was a long time. It was a long time is the point.
Yeah, I have it on May 23rd, 2014, that she's given a life sentence. So that's the date I have, not 2017.
It was probably an appeal date then that I
Yeah,
read, or just the date of the article. But either way, that is a long time after Gary's death to finally get justice.
Yeah.
It's a very long time.
Yeah.
Also, and interestingly enough, before we kind of wrap up the case and turn it back over to Candy for a few questions, Amy, we talk about this all the time in our recordings with all of the resources that are available out there in the world, the internet, documentaries, articles. Sometimes we find varying or different research, right?
Yeah.
So this was going to be my surprise Amy segment. So it'll surprise Amy and Candy. But I do have in at least one of the sources that I was relying on that at some point, and I don't know exactly what point, but at some point they did flip on each other, right? Like Ron said it was all her, accused her of everything, and then they did the same thing, meaning her legal team was like, well, it was all Ron and she was actually just being blackmailed. So, and right, that's common for people involved to flip on each other.
So according to the documents that I read, her defense lawyers say that the $400,000 that Pam gave Ron was business expenses for his help in starting up a company, which, maybe we should go into starting up business.
Yeah. Well, no matter what was used in court in this argument, it still was said maybe in her in investigating her and in her interviews and stuff that she did flip, and say it was all him. I was being blackmailed. So I actually looked a little bit more into that because it piqued my curiosity. So here's my surprise. I think, and I'll tell you guys why, but I think it's just as likely, 50-50, it's just as likely that Pam is innocent as I do that Pam is guilty.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it too. I mean, the evidence in the van is pretty damning to have her divorce papers in the van that's linked to Ron. I mean, her defense talked about, well, the DNA is not there. And the police are like, we didn't even think to test for DNA because it was before DNA was even really a thing. Like,
yeah,
there's just all these arguments around it where I could see the loopholes.
Yeah. So here's at least what I heard and read. So again, it might be true, it might not be true. I'm 50-50 on this. But Pam says at some point in her storytelling, Ron and I were good friends or dating. I can't remember which one she says, but either way, they were having like an intimate conversation over dinner or something. And she's complaining to him about how frustrating her ex is and how abusive he was to her. Remember, there were all those accusations and restraining orders and all of those things. Talks about how difficult it is with her children, how he just financially drained them and ruined them all, and he has all of these enemies. So the pitch is that Ron took this as an opportunity, knowing that she had the potential to benefit from his death somehow. And there was a comment that she made to her friend, Laura Chapman. It's Laura?
Yeah.
Laura Chapman actually testified at trial and said that she and Pam had conversation before where Pam said how easy it would be to take him out.
Well, and supposedly when that conversation happened, there was another person in the room, and that person has never agreed with Laura's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
So the defense really used Laura to kind of clinch the case because it was firsthand information.
Yes, they did.
Pam has given interviews that say that the recordings that Ron recorded and what they're saying and stuff really is taken out of context, that if you listen to and her lawyer was on one of the interviews too, where if you listen to the whole thing, police have spliced his recording into making it seem like this sinister thing when he was really talking about health problems and different things like that. And, I don't know.
See, there you go. That's a possibility. But again, the pitch is Ron knew of the potential wealth and potentially of this life insurance policy, or went out and found that he's a con man, remember?
Yeah.
That there was a large life insurance payout to be had. So Ron took it upon himself, sees an opportunity in this, takes it upon himself to disappear, steals from Pam, because remember, she reported him for stealing from her.
So you think Ron stole divorce papers and planted them to then blackmail Pam into like I've planted evidence and you better pay me.
Yes.
Interesting.
So if this is at all true, if this is a viable theory at all, Pam's version is that Ron took this upon himself, stole whatever he needed from the home, went on this recon mission, ditched the van, remember, in Yuba, California. So it's possible that Ron didn't even think it was going to get found all the way out there, or that it would never be connected. This is 1994. We didn't have social media. We didn't have police jurisdictions speaking to each other.
Yeah.
So he ditches it in somewhere so far away, and the van was found after he stayed a night in a hotel in Tucson. So he went from Colorado to Tucson over to California to ditch it, and then is found on the East Coast 9 years later. So if this is in fact true or viable at all, like I said, Ron used that as a distraction, went and killed Gary with this violent bomb, and then started blackmailing Pam from that day out for those monthly payments. Because remember, on those tapes, whether they're spliced or not, I get, we don't know, but she never confesses to anything about the murder. Gary's name is never mentioned. And so as I'm going over this story and just reading through it and kind of looking at the timeline of where things were ditched and why would Pam call in to the police to report that Ron had stolen from her if she knew Ron was on his way to kill her husband, ex-husband?
But what is Ron blackmailing her for?
Just the money.
Just for money. So he's like, I killed your husband.
And I will frame you for it.
Oh, and I'll frame you for it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like
blackmailing her. And he's a con man. Remember, he has a long history of con before this even happened.
What I've been thinking about is, did he ever commit murder before this?
Right.
Does he have a history of murder?
I don't think he's ever been arrested or
any charges of...
No.
That's a big step for...
It is.
Yeah. Well,
you're right.
And Pam's lawyers argue that he didn't have... I mean, it takes some intelligence, I would think, to build a bomb and not blow yourself up while you're doing it.
It takes specific knowledge, for sure.
So to not, like Candy was saying, to not have ever killed anybody, but to choose to kill someone with a method that is
violent.
Well, there's been cases where the pipe bomber blew himself up trying to plant the bombing device. So
So then let's consider this. He's a practiced con man, and he's in his later years. Like when he was arrested and found guilty or convicted, I mean, he was like in his 60s or something, right? You see pictures of him, like his mugshot and stuff, and he's got stark white hair. He's gained a lot of weight. Like, he hasn't shaved in forever. But he's a practiced con man. He's been doing it for long enough, right? Is it possible that he has all this stuff that he's stolen to set everything up, goes to Tucson, stakes it out, goes over to California to ditch the evidence, and hires someone to kill Gary? Because he has money. He's stolen money. He has multiple identities to work with. If he sees an opportunity, there's a $2 million payout. And remember, this is in the 90s. So $2 million, it's a lot of money now. It was a lot of money then. Sees an opportunity to get a large chunk of that by blackmailing Pam or telling Pam that he's going to frame her for murder, or that he has enough evidence to frame her for murder, including this recorded conversation they had over dinner one night where she said how angry and upset she was about this divorce and how much she hated Gary. Sees an opportunity, executes a plan, whether he was the detonator of the bomb or not, and then disappears to the East Coast.
That's $4.8 million now.
So in time money converter, with inflation, the value would be almost $5 million now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money. So his cut was supposedly $400,000. So what's that in conversion? $800,000, I'm going to say. $850,000. $909,000.
$961,000.
Oh my gosh, I was so close. $909,000. That's
969 or 61.
That's almost, again, with inflation and value, right? The value of almost $1 million today. That's money you can take and live on. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say that. That's money you could run away and live on in a different country for a long time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. Like and again, like the last thing I want to say, because Danny, I think they're both looking at me like I'm crazy. But again, if you think about the order in which things happened, and then the fact that trials are infamously sensationalized, right? And we see and hear only what the lawyers put forward, only what the prosecution puts forward, only what the judge said, like most people. And I don't believe that Pam spoke on behalf of herself at trial. I don't know,
think
but I
she
don't
did.
believe she did. You're hearing very curated evidence and pieces of the story that they want you to hear, and things are left out that they might not want you to hear.
Well, as a society, and it is changing now, but for a long time, when someone was brought to trial or arrested, the public naturally assumed they're guilty because they're like, the police wouldn't frame someone who was innocent. And now I know that the narrative is changing, and we're seeing firsthand a lot of people that have been wrongfully convicted. But as a juror, you're sitting there looking at a defendant, and subconsciously they're thinking they must be guilty.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Again, I'm 50-50 on it. I'm not saying I'm stuck on it for sure. But again, going back to the timelines, why would she call in the summer of 96 to report that Ron Young had stolen from her if they had cracked a plan for him to go kill her husband?
Yeah, I mean, murder doesn't make sense. We get into
I have a
analysis
theory.
Okay,
paralysis.
I wanna
let's hear it.
Candy. Yeah.
Yes.
My theory, first of all, back to a conversation you guys had a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
I would take a polygraph.
You
Yeah,
would?
would you?
My husband was murdered.
Mm.
I would.
Your ex-husband? Your
My
ex-husband?
ex-husband was murdered. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have an ex-husband. And I would, because I would want them to.
Would you want, but one of the questions would be, are you glad he's dead? Or would you want him dead? Not that you have to answer that, but but part of you would be like,
Well, I'm not glad he's alive.
Maybe that's the difference. I have a good relationship. I love my first husband. So I don't want him dead.
yeah.
The father of my kids. However, I also want them to chase after the right person. So I want them to eliminate me as quick as possible because I'm not guilty.
Yeah.
So when you guys had your conversation, I politely listened, but I inside disagreed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you could have cut us off.
I know. Next time I would.
And I absolutely see what you're saying. There are a lot of cases, though, where that's the trap that someone falls into,
Yeah.
wanting to help. And that's not, I'm not talking about you, but in some of those cases where that's happened, people are like, yeah, search my car, take my phone, interview me. And they're at the police station for hours and hours on end. And all of the sudden, they've delivered accidental evidence into the hands of the investigators or the police that then
Get skewed.
manipulate it, skew it, or use it to make this person look guilty. So I know exactly what you're saying. And I think that's the first initial thought of probably most integritous people that are like, I'm not guilty. Of course I want to help. I want to help.
I want you to get me out of the picture. And I
Right.
tend to, maybe we could even say overtrust. Like I think,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and I think investigators would map. They would sense.
Yeah.
I'm solid. I'm honest.
Right.
So her not wanting to do the polygraph to me is a red flag to
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
was a red flag back then.
Sure.
I also think this con man, I have a hard time taking a con man and making him a sociopath or a murderer.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a sociopath and not murder anyone. So
I hope so, because I know some sociopaths. Yes.
right? But
Well, as far as I know, none of them. But I'm just saying that's a great point.
yeah, there is a book, Sociopath Next Door. I've read it a couple times.
Yes.
And it really claims, we always think sociopaths are murderers, and they aren't. There's 1 in 100.
Mm-hmm.
They can be low in character and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a third player that we've never known of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think because con men make a bomb, I don't know. Con men know people who make bombs. So that's my running theory.
Yeah.
Ron was involved enough to know enough to blackmail her.
Yeah.
He didn't make the bomb, but he knows the bomb maker.
So then you kind of agree with my theory.
And I think the reason she said Ron Young has stolen my van is, see, I'm innocent. He's the bad guy. Does bad things. I think she may be thinking, how can I be sure to get distance between Ron and me? And I'm a citizen and he's a con man. I'm going to report him. Reports their ally in a murder.
That's what I'm saying.
No one does.
Right.
And then it worked on you, but it didn't work on me. You made that call because you want us to think you would never report your ally.
Interesting.
So I think
Interesting.
that made me not trust her. I'm like, wow.
So you think
Follow Ron.
Yeah, so you think Ron is
Uh-huh.
at least innocent, but Pam is guilty.
I think Ron is part of the plan.
That he hired the bomb maker.
That he was like, that there's one more person, the bomb maker, or where he bought the,
So justice isn't totally satisfied because there's
right, or he bought the bomb.
yeah.
You know, I just have a hard time thinking I think she is the intentional murderer and he's a con man looking for cash. And then he ended up being a murderer because he participated.
Very interesting.
Interesting.
And I think she did turn him into the car theft for agenda reasons. They'll never think it was me because all of a sudden I'm like calling him out as a criminal. And if we were in collaboration,
Yeah.
I would never call out. Which made you think she might be innocent. I think I think that was her goal. But obviously we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know, but that very well could be true. So we both agree that Ron was involved and that the potential that he hired someone else to do the dirty part of it, as they say, right, is there. You do, as a con man, right, kind of the common thread, though, I would think, between like being a murderer and a con man is you have to be willing to hurt people to get what you want.
Yes.
So there's that, but it is interesting if that was true, that Pam and him were in cahoots, and then she made that phone call where she reported that he stole from her in order to make herself look innocent and him look guilty, is a lot of premeditation. But we know that she was an intelligent woman. She was a successful commercial real estate agent. Whether she wanted to marry for wealth or not, she had a successful career before she was married to Gary and after she was married to Gary. So, you know, and I mean, obviously, you guys, I'm not saying that smart real estate agents are capable of vicious murder because there's 3 of us here right now and Danny's terrified. I'm just saying that type of premeditation typically takes a higher level of intelligence. And right, it's not like an emotional, violent reaction. It's thought through and planned. So that's interesting. Amy?
I'm thinking it's the ex-wife relationship that triggered the murder, not like, and then she was someone who knew how to persuade and use her cunning ways.
Yes, she did. She absolutely did. Amy, what have we done to you? What is your brain doing right now?
Well, I was just listening and thinking, but I will say that obviously besides Gary being a victim, but he wasn't the best person, you know. I feel bad for all these kids. He had 5 children, and his 2 oldest ended up filing a lawsuit for wrongful death against Pam and Ron and won. But Pam's kids with Gary, they've lost both their mom and their dad.
Right.
And then Gary had another child with a
Robin.
girlfriend.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so senseless to kill someone. And whether it is over $2 million or because you hate your ex or something, you know, I don't know. I feel bad that these kids like never, you know, had that relationship with their dad. And I guess society could argue that maybe their dad wasn't, you know,
well, and
a good person or whatever. But
I say this all the time. One of the things that I've learned as an adult that I consider to be kind of a core belief of mine now is that 2 things can be true at the same time. You could be a good dad.
Yeah.
And a loving dad. And it was said in some of my sources that his 2 children with Mary, even though, you know, he ended his marriage with her intentionally so that he could marry Pam, and then with Pam's children as well, that he still tried to be a good father and be available to them and be in touch we don't know much more about them, and his children are all alive, and so I'm sure that they want their privacy, and
Yeah.
or they'd be out in the news talking about it. But let's respect their privacy in the sense that we assume that they, at least want to respect his memory, if you will, and that two things can be true. He could have been a great dad. He could have even been all of his friends and stuff that are interviewed here. Keep in mind, friends speak of him highly, that he was charming and charismatic, and that he attracted people to him. You can be those things and still be a terrible business owner,
Yeah.
a terrible entrepreneur. You can make bad decisions. You can even be a wonderful human being and be greedy to some extent, right? Like greed is self-driven, it's self-motivating, but still be an excellent father and have been pursuing this dream of being wealthy using greed to get there. So that's an excellent point. That his kids absolutely have been the losers in all of this. Of course, besides Gary, who lost his life brutally, but that's a great point to kind of take it home.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting. We ended up somewhere that at the beginning didn't expect to end up, but that's how these always go.
Yeah.
Well, not always, but that's how these go. They're super fun. So before we wrap up, so Candy, Amy and I always give a brief takeaway at the end of our episodes. We're always like, well, what did you learn? What did I learn? Whatever. But we want to ask you the question today, kind of at the end. So we've talked about a little bit about Tucson and about real estate in the 90s when you were there and you started your very successful career there. And, then you moved from San Francisco to Utah. And now we're in 2024. And the real estate market and the real estate world is drastically different. So we would like to hear from you what the biggest changes in real estate have been and what their impacts have been.
Great question. So I often look back at the beginning of my career and I kind of pine after it or want it back.
Sure.
And some of the things I really enjoyed was it was very relationship driven. I did not have a cell phone that was constantly begging for my interest or attention.
Mm-hmm.
When I showed houses, I went back to my office. There'd be some look slips in my little box to grab them. These are the clients that have called or potential clients. And they expected you to call them back in a couple days.
Wow.
1 or 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we get a text 5 minutes later, hey, where are you?
Yeah.
And so the pressure that we experience in this, we are able to do more sales, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure I'm as grounded as I liked being back.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to show houses and not being interrupted. Now, one of the things I do, you guys might do this, I turn my phone off when I'm with clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I leave my phone in the car or I put it somewhere where I can't see it because I really like to be with the people I'm with.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to listen to them, and it allows me to just be a better agent.
Mm-hmm.
But I think back then, too, when I started, we had a book. And so there was a lot of networking with other agents because the book came out weekly. So if I'm showing a house on a Thursday or thinking about showing it, I don't know if it's sold because they don't tell us for another 5 days. So you'd call agents, hey, or you have a new listing, but the book doesn't come out for a week. You're calling your buddies, hey, I got a new listing. It's really great.
Wow.
Book won't be out for a few more days, but you can show it,
So the book was like a marketing tool published.
It
like
was
I said, once
all
a
of the
week.
properties.
It was all our MLS properties.
Right. No, I know. I want the audience to understand.
Oh, okay. So back then, MLS was a book, and it was delivered to all licensed agents. No one in the public was allowed to have a copy.
Mm-hmm.
We were encouraged not to share it with our clients too openly because sellers' contact information was in there,
Right.
and that was confidential.
I was just going to say for our audience, MLS stands for Multiple Listing Service,
Right.
which is what, if you look for properties online, this is what will pop up. So anyway, continue.
So we had books that changed it made it very different than what we do today.
Oh, for sure.
And then we slowly, I think it was 1996, we ended up going to a computer format, no photos of them, of the houses.
Really?
But we would get a little disc that we could put in. And now I'm thinking it was maybe daily. So we
Wow.
stick it in like this little floppy disk, stick it in, and then see what's new on the market.
Because now if a property doesn't have a photos or just has like a photo, you're like, what's
It's
wrong with
sketchy.
it? Yeah.
Also, anyone younger than us listening to this, Google floppy disk. You'll understand what it is.
And there were no photos. And I remember as agents, when we heard they were going to put photos on our very protected, secure floppy that no one else is going to have access but a licensed agent
Right.
in their office because we had no home computers.
Really?
We were like, photos, oh, this is going to open up problems.
Wow.
Then maybe buyers will see the photos. And it was funny how we were then
It's amazing how change always has resistance.
creates a little
Yeah.
And then we did get a big fancy fax machine in our office. Now this was a big deal.
It was because you were having to drive around and get wet signatures with the
guess what?
carbon
When it
copy.
first came for several years in the Arizona law, you could not use fax signatures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you had to still deliver the wet one.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So we were still driving around.
Yeah.
So please ask your question one more time.
I don't remember. I was so fascinated by the by floppy disks coming back. Oh yeah, like just how real
different.
estate has changed, and that was exactly where it was going.
Yeah,
was
no, it's-
technology has shifted how real estate happens. You know, back then, I honestly respect what agents back then, the type of work that they put into being a real estate agent, a lot more than I do in kind of a common average real estate field today, because technology allows us to shortcut a lot. And while that's efficient for time and maybe allows us the opportunity to be with our families more or be productive in other parts of our life, shortcuts can also provide just as much opportunity for people to be lazy, to slack off. And so I actually respect the amount of work that went into that because you had to grind a lot harder.
Right. I think maybe as an experienced agent who did start in the dark ages, I am grateful because I learned some nuts and bolts that I applied to our very technically driven market, which I think allows me to be more client aware. When I was a new agent, we had a little computer room, or computer, meaning it wouldn't even be called a computer today.
Right.
But we'd get in this room and we would put our little floppy disk in, or our manager did. And I remember this one agent, he was noticing my energy and stuff. And he gave me advice that I still follow today. Technology and Facebook, with all that we have. This advice is the best advice I feel I ever got. Make eye contact, care about who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
And that I haven't changed that.
Yeah.
And I think even though I have access to a lot of information now our clients have, they still don't know what to always do with that information. And I believe it's important that we know what to do with that information and explain to them the sales, the market, what matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would love to go back to a calmer time, or less interrupted type of business. We're with our client, we can be with them.
Yeah.
100%. So I try to remember.
Or when you're home because there's no computer or anything to like.
Or when you're on vacation, you're on
Yeah.
vacation. There's a joke amongst real estate agents that whenever you go on vacation, that's when you're going to do the most business.
Yeah, if you want a deal, go on vacation.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. We can edit it out.
No, go ahead.
So it's like the 90s, and there's no cell phones or anything. But at Disneyland, they made this booth you could go into and call people. Disneyland. And my pager's going off because one of my listings is getting a really good offer.
Mm-hmm.
So we literally, my kids had to watch me in this booth call my client.
That's so funny. From your pager.
So even at Disneyland, you still had to work.
Yeah, so I figured out how to find a phone to call
my
the client
gosh.
at Disneyland in this booth.
Wow.
I do want to say what was happening. The best parts of the business that were happening in the 90s is still happening today.
Okay.
And that is people find a home that meets their needs or their dreams. And we as agents get to participate in some really important work because their kids are going to go to school. They're going to meet those neighbors. It's going to dictate their commute to work or not commute. And where we live matters. And it mattered as much in 94 as it does today.
That's very true. That's so insightful and eloquent. And thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah. We really appreciate you being
It was
here.
so great to have you.
Yeah.
Not only with all those ties, but just it's fascinating to just talk to someone who, again, who started in 94 and I started in 2018, 2019, and there's a drastic difference, but we have the same similarities, the same, core beliefs and values for how we treat people and why this is an important thing, what we do. I always say people are never transactions to me, even though we help them transact. And so having you here all in all was fascinating. So thank you. My takeaway was that having Candy here was incredible. It was really great to have you as a guest. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amy, you got a takeaway you want to share with us?
I mean,
or?
my takeaway is also what Candy had mentioned earlier, because we hear all the time about how hard it is to restart a career or break into a new market. And you just have such a positive attitude about just doing it. And you not only did it once, you did it twice. And
Right.
that to me was the big takeaway.
That it can be done.
Yeah. Well, and it's all about your attitude. Like,
It absolutely is. Yep.
So
what a successful episode. This was a fun conversation to have. And thank you, of course, for coming. Amy, we did another one.
I know.
High five. We did it. All right. Well, ladies, I'll talk to you both very, very soon.
All right. See you
Bye-bye,
guys
everybody.
later.
Bye-bye.